I was 79 years old on the morning my eldest son left us to freeze in a church parking lot. March, in Iowa, carries a particular kind of cold that seeps through wool and bone alike, settling somewhere near the soul. Augustus sat beside me in the passenger seat of the borrowed van, his weathered hands folded in his lap, knuckles white from gripping nothing. We had $900 in cash, a border collie named Duke pressed against my legs for warmth, and the certain knowledge that the children we had raised no longer recognized us as human beings worthy of shelter. Gus had not spoken since Pastor Williams handed him the keys 3 hours earlier. The silence between us felt heavier than 62 years of marriage had any right to produce. I watched ice crystals form on the inside of the windshield, each one a small, sharp thing that caught what little light filtered through the gray morning. My lungs burned with every breath, the chronic damage from 2 decades in the textile mill making itself known the way it always did when the temperature dropped below freezing. I had learned not to cough too hard, because Gus would hear the wet rattle in my chest, and his face would do that thing where it went completely still, the way granite looks just before it cracks. The newspaper lay on the floor by my feet where it had fallen during the night. I could see the auction listings section, columns of numbers and addresses that represented other people's failures and losses. Someone had circled an item in red ink, though I could not remember who or when. The circle drew my eye, the way blood on snow commands attention. 3 acres plus Quonset hut, Mill Creek Road. Condition listed as salvage. Opening bid, $500. Mill Creek Road. The name struck something deep in memory. A chord I had heard Gus's father William mention during Sunday dinners decades ago, when I was still young enough to believe family gatherings meant safety. William Hartwell had been a man of few words and many silences. The kind of veteran who came back from the war with his body intact, but something fundamental rearranged behind his eyes. He would sometimes pause mid-sentence, fork halfway to his mouth, and stare at nothing, while Ruth quietly redirected the conversation around him like water flowing past a stone. I bent slowly, joints protesting the cold, and retrieved the newspaper. The advertisement was small, unremarkable among the foreclosures and estate sales that filled the page. But that name, Mill Creek Road. My voice came out rougher than I intended. The words tasted like metal and desperation. Gus, what is this? He turned his head, movements careful and deliberate. 70 years of farm work had carved his face into something that looked hewn rather than born, all angles and weathered planes. When he saw what I held, something shifted in his expression. Not quite recognition. Closer to the look a man gets when he finds a photograph of someone he used to know, before forgetting had been necessary. My father mentioned that road. The sentence hung between us, incomplete and jagged. Duke lifted his head from my lap, amber eyes tracking between us with the unnerving intelligence border collies possess. William had trained this dog, using methods he learned in some K-9 unit during the war, though he never spoke about where, or when, or why he knew how to teach an animal to find things hidden in darkness. I studied the numbers again. 500 to start. We had $900, every penny representing something sold or surrendered. My mother's silver, Gus's grandfather's pocket watch. The small things that hurt to lose, because they were all that remained of people who had loved us before the world became complicated and cruel. We could bid. Gus looked at me fully then, and I saw something I had not witnessed in the 3 months since our son Robert had destroyed us. A flicker of possibility, small and fragile as candlelight in wind. Cora. The way he said my name carried 62 years of history. Every meal cooked, every child raised, every decision we had navigated together and separately, and sometimes in opposition, until we found something that resembled agreement. But this time, I heard a question underneath the familiar syllables. This time, he was asking if I truly understood what I suggested. I did not. Not entirely. But I knew with absolute certainty that dying slowly in this parking lot, while our bodies shut down from cold and humiliation, was not an option I could accept. Not for him. Not for me. Not when there existed even the smallest chance that a rusted Quonset hut on 3 acres might offer something other than this. We go to the auction. It was not a question. The decision settled into place with the weight of stone, and I felt something shift inside me that had been dormant for longer than I cared to calculate. Some part of my spine straightening, some portion of my mother's Scottish blood, remembering that her people had survived worse than being abandoned by their children in the cold. 6 months earlier, I had known something terrible was unfolding. The knowing had come not as revelation, but as accumulated detail. Small, wrong notes in a melody I had been hearing my entire adult life. Robert had visited on a Tuesday in September, wearing a suit that cost more than our monthly grocery budget and carrying confidence like cologne. He moved through our farmhouse the way appraisers do, eyes cataloging value, mentally calculating what could be extracted and converted to cash. Gus had been in the barn checking on a cow with mastitis. Robert found me in the kitchen, where I was canning tomatoes from the garden, my hands stained red to the wrists, sweat making my thin cotton dress cling to my back, despite the box fan whirring in the window. He did not help carry the heavy pot to the sink, did not offer to lift the jars cooling on the counter, just stood in the doorway with his briefcase and his expensive shoes, and his eyes that looked at me the way you look at furniture when deciding what to keep and what to discard. Mother, we need to discuss Father's financial future. The word discuss was a lie wrapped in courtesy. I had raised this man, nursed him through chickenpox and broken bones, and the particular teenage cruelty that children inflict on each other. I knew the difference between his asking voice and his telling voice. This was telling. I kept my hands in the scalding water, focusing on the physical sensation because it was honest in a way this conversation would not be. Steam rose between us, distorting his features into something that looked almost demonic in the afternoon light. Your father's finances are fine, are they? Robert set his briefcase on my clean table without asking, clicked it open with the precision of a man who enjoyed small displays of authority. I've been reviewing the farm's performance. The margins are thin. One bad season and you could lose everything. My chest tightened, but I kept my voice level, the way Ruth had taught me during those early years of marriage when I was still learning how to navigate being a Hartwell. Never let them see you frightened. Fear is permission. We've survived bad seasons before. You were younger then. He pulled out folders, spreadsheets, documents that reduced 60 years of our lives to columns of numbers. I'm proposing an investment strategy. Let me manage your assets. Diversify. Protect your retirement. The word protect tasted like poison on the air. I dried my hands on my apron, taking time, thinking. Gus would want to hear this proposal. Gus would want to trust our son, because fathers are built to believe in their children long past the point where evidence suggests otherwise. Robert, this money represents everything we've built. Exactly why it needs professional management. His smile never reached his eyes. Had not reached his eyes since he was 15, and I first noticed the cold calculation that had replaced whatever warmth childhood had provided. I'm trying to help, Mother. Don't let fear prevent you from making smart decisions. I should have said no. Should have told him to leave, to take his briefcase and his suit and his contempt back to whatever city life had taught him that parents were resources rather than people. But I was tired from canning and the heat, and some part of me wanted to believe that maternal love could still reach whatever remained human in him. I'll discuss it with your father. That should have been the end of it. Instead, it was the beginning of how we lost everything. Gus listened to Robert's presentation in the front room while I finished the canning. I heard the murmur of voices, the rustle of papers, my husband's occasional questions delivered in that careful way he had of speaking when he did not fully understand, but did not want to appear ignorant. Robert answered with the smooth confidence of someone who had rehearsed these responses, who knew exactly which phrases would calm an elderly farmer's concerns while obscuring the actual mechanisms of his scheme. When Robert left, Gus came into the kitchen with the folders. His face carried hope mixed with uncertainty, a child's expression on an old man's features. "He says he can double our money in 18 months. I wanted to scream, wanted to grab those folders and throw them into the yard where they belonged. But 62 years of marriage had taught me that directly opposing Gus rarely worked. He was a good man, but proud, and pride makes men do foolish things when they feel their judgment is being questioned. That sounds too good to be true, Gus. He's our son, Cora. He's a financial advisor. This is what he does. For strangers, not family." But Gus had already decided. I could see it in the set of his shoulders. He wanted to believe that Robert had inherited something decent from us, some core of integrity that would prevent him from betraying the people who had raised him. Men are foolish that way, thinking blood means loyalty. I could have fought harder, could have forbidden it, though that would have created a different kind of damage between us. Instead, I made a choice that I would spend the next 6 months regretting with every cell in my body. I stayed silent. The investments failed, though failed suggests something accidental rather than the deliberate theft it actually represented. Robert took our money, moved it through accounts and vehicles and instruments I did not understand, and when the statements stopped coming and the phone calls went unreturned, we discovered that everything we had built across 6 decades had evaporated like frost under morning sun. The bank foreclosed. Our daughter Patricia, the lawyer, stood with Robert, her voice cold and clinical as she explained why a nursing home would be the most sensible option for parents our age. Only Michael, our youngest, sent anything approaching apology. A check for $200 and a note that contained just 3 words. "I am sorry." The money was insultingly inadequate. The acknowledgement of wrongdoing felt like the only honest thing any of our children had offered in months. The day strangers loaded our furniture into trucks, I did not cry where Gus could see. I waited until I was alone in the church bathroom, door locked, water running to cover the sounds of something breaking inside my chest that felt too fundamental to repair. The auction house smelled like old wood and defeated hopes. Gus and I arrived 30 minutes early, Duke on a leash between us, the 3 of us drawing stares from the men who filled the folding chairs. Most were dealers or flippers, people who made their living buying other people's failures and reselling them for profit. They looked at us the way you look at lost tourists who have wandered into the wrong neighborhood, with a mixture of pity and contempt. I kept my spine straight and my eyes forward. My mother had been a mill worker before she was anything else, and she had taught me that poor people cannot afford to look ashamed. Shame is a luxury. Survival requires a different posture entirely. We found seats in the 3rd row. The metal chairs were cold through my thin coat, but I did not fidget or shift. Gus sat rigid beside me, his hands clasped between his knees. Duke settled at my feet, his weight warm against my legs, his breathing steady and calm in a way that made me grateful for creatures who did not understand humiliation. The auctioneer was a man named Frank Morrison, someone Gus had known peripherally for 40 years through Farm Bureau meetings and equipment sales. He did not acknowledge us beyond a brief nod, professional distance serving as kindness. The room filled with the sound of men greeting each other, discussing prospects, sharing information about which lots were worth pursuing and which were trash. Lot 47 came up an hour into the sale. By then my back ached from sitting and my lungs felt tight. but I forced myself to breathe slowly and quietly, because coughing would draw attention. Frank's voice carried across the room without need for amplification, decades of practice giving him the exact pitch and rhythm to command attention. Lot 47, 3 acres on Mill Creek Road. Quonset hut, condition listed as salvage. Opening bid, $500. Silence. The kind that feels deliberate, calculated. Men who made their living from auctions knew when to wait, when to let uncomfortable quiet do the work of driving prices down. 400? More silence. Someone in the back coughed, the sound harsh and amused. 300? Come on, folks. 3 acres and a structure, even salvage, has to be worth 300 to somebody. I felt the moment crystallize around me with perfect clarity. Every person in this room thought that land was worthless. Every man who had looked at us with pity believed that 2 elderly people buying a rusted Quonset hut represented the final desperate gasp of lives already finished. They were wrong. They did not know about Mill Creek Road, did not know about William Hartwell's silences, or the way Ruth had sometimes looked at that name when her husband mentioned it during Sunday dinners. I raised my hand. The motion felt enormous, as though I were lifting the weight of every assumption these men had made about me, about us, about what old people were capable of when pushed past endurance into the territory where survival requires transformation. Frank's eyebrows rose slightly, professional mask cracking for just a moment. $300 from Mrs. Hartwell. Heads turned. I heard whispers, saw men exchanging glances that mixed curiosity with something uglier. Jerry Sutton, who owned the salvage yard on Route 20 and had made a career of buying junk and extracting value, pivoted in his seat to stare at me directly. His voice carried amusement and contempt in equal measure. $350. Gus's hand found mine. His fingers were rough from work, warm despite the cold room. He was asking without words if I was certain, if I understood what I was doing, if this was truly the path I wanted us to walk. I squeezed back, certain, committed, unwilling to surrender. 400. The room's energy shifted. These were men who understood stubbornness, who respected the willingness to overpay for principle even when they thought the principle was foolish. Jerry Sutton's amusement faded into something closer to irritation. He had expected to buy this lot for 200, strip the Quonset for scrap metal, and turn a quick profit. 450. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my expression neutral. We had $900. After this purchase, we would have $400 remaining. $400 to rebuild an entire life. 500. The number left my mouth steady and clear. No tremor of doubt or fear. Jerry Sutton held my gaze for what felt like an entire minute. I did not blink, did not look away. Held that stare with every ounce of steel my Scottish ancestors had used to survive mines and mills and winters that killed the weak. He broke first. Too rich for my blood. You want that rust heap? It's yours. Frank's gavel hovered, giving Jerry one final chance to reconsider. 500 to Cordelia Hartwell. Going once? Pause. Going twice. The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the room like a gunshot, and I felt something fundamental shift in my chest. We owned 3 acres and a Quonset hut. We owned possibility. We owned a chance. The paperwork took 20 minutes. I signed my name in the spaces Frank indicated, each signature an act of defiance against every person who had written us off as finished. The deed would be filed with the county within a week. The key, an ancient thing that looked like it had not been used in decades, transferred from Frank's hand to mine with the weight of consequence. Carl Henderson, who had farmed the land adjacent to our old property before the foreclosure, waited until we were walking toward the van before speaking. His voice carried just far enough to ensure I would hear. "Cordelia Hartwell, what in God's name are you planning to do with that worthless piece of land?" I stopped walking. Gus continued a few steps before realizing I was no longer beside him. I turned slowly, taking my time, letting the moment stretch until Carl's smirk began to falter into uncertainty. "Live on it, and prove that I am considerably less worthless than you imagine." The silence that followed felt like vindication. Then, unexpectedly, someone started clapping. Slow at first, then joined by two others. Not everyone in that room had looked at us with contempt. Some remembered who we had been before Robert destroyed us. Some understood what it meant to refuse to stay defeated. I did not smile or acknowledge the applause, just turned and walked to the van where Gus waited with an expression I had not seen on his face in months. Something like hope. Something like respect. Duke pressed against my legs as I climbed into the passenger seat, and I buried my hand in his thick fur, drawing warmth and comfort from the living creature who had not abandoned us when abandonment would have been easier. Gus started the engine. The heater coughed to life, pushing cold air that would eventually warm. "Cora," I looked at him. "I should have listened to you about Robert." The admission cost him something. Men of his generation did not easily confess error, particularly not to their wives. I wanted to be gracious, to wave away the apology and move forward without examining the wound. But something in me had shifted during that auction. Some part that had been dormant or suppressed or simply sleeping had awakened to the knowledge that grace without accountability was another word for enabling. "Yes, you should have." He flinched, but I continued before he could retreat into wounded silence. "But I should have fought harder, instead of staying quiet to keep peace. We both failed. We both trusted when we should have protected. And now we live with the consequence." The words sat between us, heavy and true. Then Gus did something that surprised me. He reached across and took my hand, brought it to his lips, kissed my scarred knuckles with a tenderness that hurt more than anger would have. "Then we fix it together." I nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in my throat. The drive to Mill Creek Road took us through Cedar Falls, past the hardware store where Gus had bought supplies for 60 years, past the diner where we had eaten breakfast every Saturday morning, past the houses and businesses that had formed the landscape of our adult lives. None of it was ours anymore. We were ghosts moving through a town that no longer recognized us as residents, only as cautionary tales. The property revealed itself slowly. 3 acres is not much land by Iowa farming standards, but after months of living in a church parking lot, it looked vast and full of possibility. The Quonset hut sat at the highest point, its curved steel roof catching afternoon light in a way that made the rust look almost intentional, like patina rather than decay. Gus wanted to enter first, some instinct about protecting me asserting itself despite everything. I placed my hand on his arm, felt the muscle tense beneath my palm. "Augustus Hartwell, I have survived 3 childbirths, 40 years in a textile mill, and being betrayed by our son. A rusty Quonset hut is not going to kill me." His laugh came unexpected and raw, the sound of tension breaking. He stepped back, executed a small, formal bow that was only half mocking. "Yes, ma'am." Duke went in ahead of us, his nails clicking on the concrete foundation as he began a systematic investigation of the interior. The sound was purposeful, methodical, not the random wandering of a curious animal, but the deliberate pattern William had drilled into him through months of training. Search mode. Find what is hidden. I stepped through the door behind Duke, and afternoon light spilled into the space in golden shafts that revealed both the neglect and the underlying care. Dust motes danced in the beams like tiny spirits. The curved walls created strange acoustics, making our breathing sound amplified and close. Equipment stood shrouded under canvas tarps, dark shapes that could have been anything. Industrial shelving lined one wall, stacked with boxes and containers and supplies that someone had organized with military precision. Tools hung on pegboards, each one outlined in fading paint so you would know immediately if something was missing. I recognized Ruth's hand in this. The organization, the labels, the hospital corners on the way the tarps had been folded and secured. William might have purchased and stored these things, but Ruth had made sure they would remain useful when the time came. Gus moved to one of the shrouded shapes and pulled back the canvas. Underneath sat a Farmall tractor, model year 1947, if I remembered correctly. The red paint had faded but remained intact. Tires were flat but looked repairable. The engine probably had not turned over since Harry Truman was president. But the beauty of simple machinery is that time damages it less than complexity. "This is worth something," I heard the calculation in his voice, the farmer's instinct to assess value and potential. But I was not looking at the tractor. I was watching Duke, who had stopped his investigation in front of a section of shelving near the back corner. He sat, spine straight, eyes fixed on something I could not yet see, the same posture William had taught him to adopt when he found what he was searching for. I crossed the space carefully, aware of my footing on the uneven concrete. Duke did not move as I approached, just maintained that absolute stillness that meant success, that meant discovery. Behind stacked wooden crates, barely visible in the shadows, sat an army surplus box. Dark green metal, size of a small suitcase, with stenciling on the side that decades of dust had partially obscured. I brushed the surface clean with my sleeve, and letters emerged from beneath the grime. W.H. 443. William Hartwell. Box 443. My hands shook as I tried to open it. The padlock had rusted through, the metal brittle enough that it crumbled when I applied pressure. Gus came to help, but I shook my head, needing to do this myself, needing the action to belong to me. The lid resisted, then surrendered with a groan of corroded hinges. Inside, preserved by the sealed container and the cool, dry environment of the Quonset, lay the careful preparations of people who had loved us before we knew we needed loving. A leather journal, its cover cracked but intact. Photographs held together with a rubber band that disintegrated at my touch. Official documents in manila folders. A pocket watch with a stopped face. And at the very bottom, a hand-drawn map with annotations in handwriting I recognized as William's. But there was something else. Another notebook, smaller, with a fabric cover that I knew before opening belonged to Ruth. She had kept journals her entire adult life, using the practice the way other people used prayer, a method of organizing thought and feeling into something manageable. I lifted Ruth's journal carefully, aware that I was holding something sacred. The first entry was dated August 1946. William and I have decided something that I pray is right. We are buying land on Mill Creek Road. 3 acres with a Quonset hut that can be converted to storage. No one knows about this except us. We are creating a safety net that we hope Augustus will never need. But if he does, it will be here, waiting. My vision blurred. I blinked rapidly, refusing to cry in front of Gus, because if I started I might not stop, and we still had work to do. Gus's voice came soft behind me. "What does it say?" I read the entry aloud, my voice steady through force of will alone. When I finished, the silence stretched until Duke whined softly, pressing his body against my legs in that way he had of offering comfort. Gus sat heavily on an overturned crate, the map spread across his knees. His hands trembled as he traced the lines his father had drawn 70 years ago. Roads, boundaries, markers, and in one corner, barely visible, a notation that made my breath catch. For J. When the land cannot provide, the past will. J for James, William's middle name, the one Gus had been named after, the family name that connected generations. I flipped through more pages of Ruth's journal, and the story emerged like photographs developing in solution. William had been planning this since 1946, had bought the land with money saved from his military service, had stockpiled supplies, equipment, tools, had organized everything with the precision of a man preparing for siege. But it was Ruth who explained why. March 15th, 1948. William's brother Harold came to dinner tonight. It ended badly. Harold accused William of stealing their father's money, of manipulating the will, of being a liar and a thief. They have not spoken since. William is devastated, but he hides it the way he hides everything. This is why Mill Creek matters. This is why we prepare, because William has seen what money does to family. How it turns brothers into enemies, sons into strangers. He will not let that happen to Augustus if he can prevent it. So we build this insurance, this safety net, and we pray Augustus never needs it. But if he does, it will be here. The pieces assembled themselves into understanding. William and Ruth had watched family destroy itself over inheritance, had decided their son deserved protection from that particular cruelty. And because they could not know what form the threat would take or when it would arrive, they had prepared for everything. I looked up from the journal to find Gus watching me with an expression that mixed grief and gratitude in equal measure. They knew. Not specifically, but they understood the pattern. They understood that money makes people cruel. I kept reading, moving through months and years of Ruth's careful documentation. She had been more than just William's partner in this. She had been the architect of specifics, while he provided the foundation. The organization of supplies, the inventory lists, the rotation schedules for stored food, all Ruth's work. And then, buried deep in the journal, I found an entry that made everything else make sense. May 3rd, 1970. I met Augustus's wife today, Cordelia. She is younger than I expected, and I can see the mill work has already marked her. But there is steel in her spine. Steel and fire. I watched her handle Augustus's mother, who was being difficult about the wedding. Cordelia did not bend or break, did not raise her voice or lose composure, just held her ground until the old woman tired of fighting. I thought then, this woman will need to be strong. This woman will need to be a warrior. And I'm glad Augustus found her. Because if Mill Creek is ever needed, it will be Cordelia who makes it work. Not Augustus. He is a good man, but he follows where others lead. Cordelia leads. She just does not know it yet. The words hit me with physical force. Ruth had seen something in me that I had not seen in myself, had recognized a quality or capacity that decades of being a farmer's wife had buried under layers of accommodation and compromise. Gus read over my shoulder, his breathing audible in the quiet space. She knew you, Cora, better than you knew yourself. I wanted to argue, to dismiss the observation as Ruth's wishful thinking rather than accurate assessment, but the evidence sat all around us. Ruth had not just prepared for her son's potential need, she had prepared for the woman her son married, had left breadcrumbs and instructions and tools specifically designed for someone like me to find and use. At the bottom of the box, beneath all the documents and journals, I found one more thing. An envelope, sealed with wax that had somehow survived intact across decades. On the front, in Ruth's precise handwriting, To the woman who loves my son. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Gus stood and moved to give me privacy, but I shook my head. Whatever this letter contained, he needed to hear it. The paper inside was heavy, expensive, the kind Ruth would have saved for important occasions. Her handwriting flowed across the page with the practiced elegance of someone who had learned penmanship when such things still mattered. To the woman who loves my son. If you are reading this, then the worst has happened.
You have lost everything. Your children have betrayed you. You are standing in this Quonset hut with nowhere else to go and very little reason to hope. I know this because I have seen it happen before. I watched William's family tear itself apart over money and inheritance. I watched brothers become enemies. I watched love turn to litigation. And I swore that if I could prevent my son from experiencing that pain, I would do everything in my power to create an alternative. This is that alternative. Everything in this Quonset belongs to you now. Not to Augustus, not to your children. To you. Because I have always believed, that when crisis comes, it is the women who save their families. Not through dramatic gestures, but through quiet persistence, through the willingness to do what must be done, even when it hurts. You may be wondering why we never told Augustus about this place. The answer is complicated, but true. We needed him to build his own life, to earn his own success, to know that everything he achieved came from his own hands and heart. Telling him about Mill Creek would have changed that, would have created dependency where we wanted independence. But you did not marry my son for his money or his farm or his potential inheritance. You married him because you loved him. And love that survives betrayal and loss is the rarest thing in this world. So here is what I leave you. The Quonset and everything it contains. Supplies that will last months if you are careful. Equipment that can be restored. Tools that still work if you know how to use them. And in Des Moines, at a bank whose name may have changed by now, a safety deposit box registered under box 443. The key is taped to the bottom of this container. Inside that box you will find investments, bonds, certificates, a savings account that has been accruing interest since 1947. William was a careful investor. Time has been kind to his choices. You will have enough, not to return to your old life, but to build something new. But more important than money or supplies, I leave you this truth. You are stronger than you know, braver than you believe, more capable than anyone, including yourself, has ever given you credit for. The task ahead will be hard. People will doubt you, mock you, tell you that starting over at your age is foolish. They are wrong. They have always been wrong. The land provides for those who refuse to give up on it. Trust yourself. Trust the dog. Duke is more than he appears. Trust that Augustus loves you even when he does not know how to show it. And trust that sometimes the most important journeys begin when we think we have reached the end. With all my faith and hope. Ruth Hartwell. Written April 1992. I finished reading, and the silence in the Quonset felt cathedral deep. Gus's breathing had gone ragged, and when I looked at him, I saw tears on his weathered face, unashamed and unchecked. She prepared this for you. All of it. For you. I could not speak past the tightness in my throat, could only nod and clutch the letter and feel the weight of being seen by someone who had died before I fully understood what seeing meant. Duke pressed harder against my legs, grounding me in the physical present. The sun had moved lower while we read, and the light coming through the gaps in the Quonset's panels had taken on the golden quality of late afternoon. Everything looked softer, gentler, full of potential rather than decay. I folded Ruth's letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Moved to the bottom of the box, where she had promised the key would be taped.
My fingers found it immediately, the metal still bright despite years in darkness, marked with a tag that read FNB Des Moines, Box 443. First Federal Bank, or whatever it had become through mergers and acquisitions and the endless consolidation that had reshaped American banking since William first walked through their doors with money to invest. Gus came to stand beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. He did not try to take the key or the letter or assume control of what happened next. Just stood there, present and solid, and waiting. I looked around the Quonset with new eyes, saw not the rust and dust and decades of neglect, but the foundation William and Ruth had built, the careful preparation, the love that had extended across generations into a future they would never see. My voice came steady when I finally spoke, the words feeling like truth in a way few things had felt true in months. We are not just surviving this, Gus. We are going to build something that proves we are more than what our children tried to make us. He nodded slowly, then did something that surprised me. Took my hand, brought it to his lips, kissed the palm where years of work had left calluses and scars. I have been married to you for 62 years, Cordelia, and I am just now understanding who you actually are. The admission hurt and healed in equal measure. We had lived together for 6 decades, raised children, weathered losses, celebrated victories. But somewhere in all that living, we had fallen into patterns that obscured as much as they revealed. I had become the farmer's wife. He had become the provider. We had forgotten that beneath those roles lived 2 people capable of transformation. We can't change the past, Matthew said, finally. We can only decide what happens next. And what happens next? Matthew looked at the Quonset, at the land stretching around them, at the dog whose loyalty had never wavered. We build something worth building. We live well, and we figure out how to make sure this, he gestured at everything around them, means something beyond just us. Night was coming. We would need to spend one more evening in the church van, surrounded by the thin metal walls that had been our shelter for months. But tomorrow, we would return to Mill Creek Road. Tomorrow, we would begin the work of turning Ruth's preparation into our salvation. I gathered the journals and maps and documents back into the Army surplus box. Gus carefully replaced the tarp over the Farmall tractor. Duke made one final circuit of the Quonset's interior, nose to the ground, confirming that he had found everything that needed finding. As we walked back to the van through the gathering dark, I felt the weight of the key in my pocket. 443. A number that represented hope and investment, and the quiet faith that 2 people who died decades ago had placed in a future they could not see. Gus started the engine. The heater fought against the cold with mechanical persistence. He looked at me across the dim interior, his face half shadow and half light from the dashboard glow. Tomorrow we go to Des Moines? I shook my head. Tomorrow we make the Quonset livable. Des Moines can wait until we have a home. The shift in priority felt significant. Ruth's letter had been clear about the money, about the resources waiting in that bank vault. But she had also been clear about something more fundamental, that rebuilding required foundation before it required financing. We needed shelter, warmth, safety, the basic requirements of survival before we could think about anything more complex. Gus nodded, understanding without argument. Luke settled between us, his presence warm and steady, and more comforting than words. I pulled Ruth's journal from the box and opened it to a page near the middle, reading by the faint light from the dashboard. Her handwriting flowed across the page with the precision of someone who understood that words mattered. The documentation was how women passed knowledge forward when the world refused to listen. September 10th, 1985. William is gone now. Died last month, and I am alone with these secrets. Augustus asks me sometimes about his father, about the war, about the silences. I tell him what I can, which is very little. How do you explain to a son that his father loved him so much it looked like distance? That preparation can be the deepest form of care? I cannot. So instead I maintain what William built. I rotate the supplies, I check the investments, I update the instructions. And I write these letters to the future, to the woman I pray will be strong enough to do what must be done when the time comes. If you are reading this, Cordelia, then you have proven worthy of that prayer. Do not doubt yourself. Do not let anyone make you small. The world will try. Children especially will try. But you are descended from people who survived worse than this. Remember that. Use it. Become it. I closed the journal and pressed it against my chest, feeling the weight of Ruth's expectations and her faith. She had believed in me before I believed in myself, had seen capacity where I had only seen duty, had known that crisis would either break me or remake me into something harder and more essential. I chose to be remade. Gus was already asleep, his breathing deep and even. Duke watched me with those knowing amber eyes, and I reached down to scratch behind his ears. Tomorrow we would return to Mill Creek Road. Tomorrow we would begin the transformation from people who had been destroyed into people who refused to stay destroyed. And somewhere in Des Moines, in a vault beneath a bank that might not even carry the same name anymore, Ruth and William's careful investments waited to prove that love could extend across decades and death into the exact moment it was needed most. Morning arrived with the kind of pale light that makes promises it cannot keep. We drove back to Mill Creek Road in silence, broken only by Duke's occasional shift in the back seat. The Quonset stood exactly as we had left it, patient and immovable, waiting for us to decide what it would become. I had Ruth's journal open on my lap, reading by the strengthening daylight as Gus navigated the rutted access road. Her instructions began on page 47, written in the methodical style of someone who understood that clarity could mean the difference between survival and surrender. Step 1. Inventory. Do not touch anything. Only observe. Understand what you have before you begin deciding what to do with it. Step 2. Prioritize. Warmth before food. Food before comfort. Comfort before hope. Hope sustains, but only after the body's immediate needs are met. Step 3. Community. You cannot do this alone. Find allies. Build relationships. Remember that isolation kills as surely as cold or hunger. Step 4. Let him help. Augustus will want to carry everything. Do not allow it. But do not shut him out either. Partnership means sharing the weight, not one person collapsing under it. Step 5. Trust the dog. Duke is not an ordinary animal. William trained him using methods from the war. He will find what you need when you need it. Do not dismiss his instincts. The precision of it moved something in my chest. Ruth had thought through every detail, anticipated every mistake I might make, provided guidance for situations I had not yet encountered. This was not simply preparation. This was inheritance of a kind I had never imagined. Knowledge passed from one woman to another across the boundary of death. We parked near the Quonset's entrance. The morning air carried the smell of earth waking from winter, that particular Iowa scent of soil and possibility that farming families learn to read like scripture. Gus moved toward the door, but I touched his arm, stopping him. Let me check Ruth's inventory list first. She left specific instructions about what we would find where. He stepped back without argument, and I saw something shift in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or acceptance. After 62 years of making most decisions, he was learning to follow my lead in this particular dance. I found Ruth's laminated inventory sheet tucked into a protective sleeve in her journal. The lamination had preserved it perfectly, the typed text still crisp and legible despite decades of storage. Left wall shelving, first section. 50 cans of vegetables. Check seals carefully. If intact, contents remain safe for up to 50 years. Beans, corn, tomatoes.
Rotate oldest to front for immediate use. Left wall shelving, second section. Wool blankets, sealed in heavy paper. Paper prevents moth damage. Do not unwrap until ready to use. Count: 12 blankets, queen size. Left wall shelving, third section. Kerosene lanterns, quantity 4. Fuel stored in sealed metal cans beneath bottom shelf. Estimated 3 gallons remaining. Wicks may need replacement. Right wall equipment. Farmall tractor, model year 1947. Engine will require service, but structure is sound. This is Augustus's inheritance from William. Let him restore it.
The work will heal something in him. The list continued for 3 pages, every item catalogued with the precision of someone who understood that details mattered. Ruth had not just stored supplies. She had created a system, organized chaos into order, transformed a rusted Quonset hut into something that could sustain life. I moved through the space with the list as my guide, Duke following at my heels. Everything Ruth had promised was exactly where she said it would be. The cans showed no signs of rust or damage. The blankets smelled faintly of cedar, the protective scent still working after all these years. The kerosene lanterns sat in a neat row, their glass chimneys wrapped in newspaper that had yellowed, but not crumbled.
In the back corner, behind stacked wooden crates, I found what Ruth's list described as critical storage. A small door set into the Quonset's wall, secured with a padlock that had rusted through. Gus came over with bolt cutters from the tool wall, and the lock surrendered without struggle. The door opened onto stairs descending into darkness. Cool air flowed up from below, carrying the scent of earth and concrete. And something else. Motor oil and old paper, and the particular smell of spaces where time moves differently. Ruth's list had a single line about this. Cellar access. Key taped under third shelf if lock fails. Additional supplies below. Letters for specific situations. Ring for the right moment. You will know when. I found a kerosene lantern and matches that still struck after God knew how many years. The flame caught, steadied, pushed back the darkness enough to reveal concrete steps leading down. Duke descended ahead of me, his nails clicking a rhythm that sounded almost musical in the enclosed space. The cellar was perhaps 30 feet square, walls of poured concrete, floor cold even through my shoes. More shelving lined every wall, stacked with boxes labeled in Ruth's precise hand. Photographs, letters, army records, medical supplies. A trunk with William's name stenciled on the side in fading military stencil. And in the center of the space, on a small wooden table, another metal box. Newer than the one we had found upstairs. The lock still bright despite years underground. But that could wait. First, we needed to make the Quonset livable. The cellar's treasures would reveal themselves in time. Ruth had been clear about priorities, and I trusted her judgment more than my own curiosity. Back upstairs, I found Gus examining the tractor, with the focused attention of a man who had spent his life understanding machinery. His hands moved over the engine with the careful touch of someone reading Braille, feeling for damage or decay. Engines seized, but not rusted through. Fuel system needs complete rebuild. But the bones are good, Cora. This thing could run again. The hope in his voice made my throat tight. He needed this project, needed something to fix with his hands, while I worked on fixing everything else. Then make it run. But first, help me inventory what we can sell for immediate cash. We spent the next 3 hours creating lists. Ruth's supplies were extensive, but not infinite. The canned food would last months if we were careful. The blankets provided warmth. The kerosene lanterns meant light. But we needed money for things Ruth could not have anticipated. Propane for heating. Materials for repairs. Das for the van. In the far corner, beneath tarps I had not yet pulled back, we found 3 50-gallon drums marked with hazard symbols and the word diesel in Ruth's handwriting. Gus tapped on the drums, listening to the resonance. Full, or near to it. She used fuel stabilizer. If the seals held, this diesel is still good. I did the math in my head. 150 gallons at current market price meant real money. Enough to fund the immediate work we needed to do. Enough to buy time.
We sell it.
Gus looked uncertain for the first time that morning. I can take it to Edmund Aldrich at the feed store. He'll give us a fair price. I shook my head. We go together. And I negotiate. His eyebrows rose, decades of habit warring with new understanding. Then he nodded slowly, acceptance settling into place like ice forming on still water. All right, Cora. You negotiate. The feed store occupied the same building it had claimed for 40 years. Red paint and white trim and a wooden sign that Edmund's father had carved in 1952. The parking lot held a handful of trucks, farmers getting early starts on spring preparation. We parked near the entrance, and I took a moment to steady myself before opening the door. The store smelled of grain and leather and the particular mixture of chemicals that defined agricultural commerce. Men clustered near the counter, their conversation dying when we entered. Eyes tracked us with the mixture of curiosity and judgment I had learned to expect since the foreclosure. Edmund Aldrich stood behind the register, a man in his early 60s with the weathered face of someone who had spent his life outdoors. He looked up from his paperwork, surprise flickering across his features, before professional courtesy took over. I did not wait for Gus to speak, did not defer or hesitate, or give anyone time to assume that I was merely accompanying my husband, rather than conducting business of my own. Edmund, we have 150 gallons of diesel fuel. Stabilized, seals intact, tests clean. Market price is $4 per gallon. We are offering it at $3.50 because we need cash quickly and do not have time to find retail buyers. The words came out steady and clear, each syllable a small act of reclamation. Edmund's eyes widened slightly, his gaze shifting from me to Gus and back again. Gus stood beside me, but slightly behind, his posture making clear that I was leading this negotiation. Mrs. Hartwell. Edmund's voice carried no mockery, just careful assessment. That is below market value. I know, but it is also a guaranteed sale of quality product with no uncertainty about condition. We need the money quickly. You gain by buying below market. Both parties benefit. I paused, letting the business logic settle before adding the request that mattered more than the diesel. But we also need something else. Referrals. Recommendations for plumbers, electricians, carpenters, people who work honestly with elderly clients and do not inflate prices when they see gray hair. This was the gamble. I was not just selling diesel. I was building a network, creating connections that might sustain us when money alone would not be enough. Edmund studied me with new attention, seeing something he had not expected to find. A slow smile spread across his face, genuine rather than polite. Mrs. Hartwell, I will buy your diesel at full market price, $4 per gallon, $600 total. Why? Because you remind me of my mother. She was tough in exactly the way you are being tough right now, and because anyone who has the sense to ask for referrals alongside a sale is someone I want to support.
He pulled a business card from a holder on the counter, wrote 3 names and numbers on the back in careful script.
These are good people. Tell them I sent you. They will treat you fairly.
Relief and gratitude warred in my chest, but I kept my expression neutral. Accepting kindness required its own kind of strength, the willingness to be vulnerable enough to need help while maintaining enough dignity to receive it gracefully.
Thank you, Edmund. We will arrange delivery tomorrow.
No need. I will pick it up. Just tell me where. I gave him directions to Mill Creek Road, watched his eyebrows rise as he recognized the location. The old Quonset property? I heard you bought that at auction. We did. People said you were foolish. People have been wrong about many things. Edmund laughed, a sound that carried respect rather than condescension. I believe they have. My wife, Beatrice, has been wanting to meet you. She knew Ruth Hartwell years ago. Would you mind if she came along tomorrow? Before I could answer, a woman emerged from the back office, 60 or thereabouts, with hair that had once been dark, but now carried streaks of gray like silver threads through charcoal. Her eyes were the pale blue of April sky, sharp and assessing.
You are Cordelia Hartwell.
It was statement rather than question. I nodded.
I am Beatrice Aldrich. My mother-in-law was Ruth Hartwell's friend before she passed. Ruth spoke about you sometimes.
Said you were stronger than you knew. Said that if anything ever happened to Augustus, you would be the one to save the family. The words hit like stones dropped into still water, ripples spreading outward into implications I was still learning to process. Ruth had not just planned for crisis, she had talked about me, had seen something worth discussing with her friends, had believed in capacity I was only beginning to discover. Beatrice continued, her voice carrying warmth that felt genuine rather than performative. I grow gardens. I can. I preserve. If you need help learning those skills, or just someone to talk to about what it is like being a woman trying to survive in a world that thinks we expire at 60, please, call me. She handed me a card with her personal number written in the same careful script Edmund had used. These people still believed in the power of handwritten communication, in the weight of ink on paper as promise. Thank you. The inadequacy of the words embarrassed me, but Beatrice smiled as though I had said exactly the right thing.
We take care of each other, Cordelia. That is how we survive.
2 weeks later, we were ready for Des Moines. The Quonset had been transformed from storage to shelter through work that left my hands blistered and my back aching, but my spirit steadier than it had been in months. We had running water from a well that Duke had somehow led us to discover. We had electricity from solar panels Edmund helped us install, at cost. We had warmth from a propane heater and light from the lanterns when the sun went down. The drive to Des Moines took 3 hours through landscape that was just beginning to remember green. Gus handled the driving while I navigated and read more of Ruth's letters. She had numbered them, organized them by situation and need. Letter 3 was marked, "For the Des Moines trip." My dearest Cordelia, when you reach the bank, you will likely feel overwhelmed. The numbers will seem impossible. The wealth will feel disconnected from any reality you have known. Do not let shock become paralysis. William invested carefully for 30 years. Time and compound interest have made those investments worth more than we ever imagined. This money is real. It is yours. Use it wisely, but use it. First priority. Make the Quonset a home. Not just shelter, but a place where you feel safe and comfortable. Spend what is needed for that. Second priority, help others. You will know who needs help when you see them. Do not hoard or accumulate beyond what security requires. Money that sits idle is money that fails its purpose. Third priority, secure your future.
but do not let security become prison. You are 79 years old. You have perhaps 10 or 20 years remaining. Do not waste them being careful when you could be living. Remember this above all. Wealth is not measured in dollars. Wealth is the person sitting beside you in the car. Wealth is the community that shows up when you need them.
Maint is the purpose that gets you out of bed in the morning. The money is a tool. Do not let it become an identity. I trust you to use it well. With love, Ruth. I finished reading and found tears on my face. Gus reached across and took my hand without taking his eyes from the road. She loved you. She saw me. That might be rarer than love. Prairie Trust Financial occupied a building that spoke of 1980s ambition, now faded into functional competence. We found parking 2 blocks away and walked through spring morning that carried the smell of exhaust and possibility in equal measure. The woman who met us in the lobby was perhaps 55, with blonde hair styled in a way that suggested professional attention and eyes that assessed us with careful kindness. Her name tag read Harriet Pemberton, Senior Account Manager. Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell? I am Harriet. We spoke on the phone. Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine. She led us through secured doors into the vault area, explaining procedures and verification requirements as we walked. The safety deposit room was small and cold, lined with metal boxes of various sizes. Box 443 sat in the bottom row, larger than I had expected. 18 inches long, perhaps a foot deep. Harriet inserted her master key alongside the one Ruth had left us, and the mechanism clicked with mechanical precision. I will give you privacy. Take whatever time you need. She withdrew, pulling the door closed behind her. Gus and I stood looking at the box, neither of us quite ready to open it and discover whether Ruth's promises matched reality. I reached in first. My fingers found papers, thick folders, the crinkle of documents that felt important. I lifted them out carefully, setting them on the viewing table Harriet had indicated. Stock certificates, dozens of them, issued to William Hartwell in dates ranging from 1955 through 1985. Companies I recognized and companies I did not. IBM, Coca-Cola, 3M. Names that had survived and thrived across decades. Beneath the certificates, bearer bonds in denominations that made my vision blur. $50,000 in face value, issued in 1960 and matured beyond their original terms. And at the bottom, a bank book. First Federal Bank of Des Moines. Account opened January 1947. The final entry, dated December 1985, showed a balance of $47,000 with a notation, converted to certificate of deposit, annual rollover authorized. I did the rough calculation in my head. $47,000 in 1985, compounded annually at even modest interest rates for 40 years. The numbers became astronomical. Combined with the stock certificates and bonds, we were looking at wealth that transformed everything. Gus sat heavily in the chair Harriet had provided, his face pale. Cora, this is $620,000, maybe more. My voice came from somewhere outside myself, distant and hollow. They saved us. They saved us 70 years before we needed saving. But there was more. Beneath all the financial instruments, one final envelope. Thick paper, sealed with wax, addressed in Ruth's hand. To Cordelia, from Ruth. I opened it with trembling fingers. Cordelia, if you have reached this letter, you have completed the journey I could only imagine. You have found the Quonset. You have read my journals. You have come to Des Moines despite every reasonable voice telling you this was foolish. I am proud of you. I met you only 10 years before I died, but I knew within an hour of our first conversation that you were strong enough for what might come. Augustus needed you. Not because he is weak.
He is not. But because he is strong in ways that require a different kind of strength to support. He builds with his hands. You build with your heart. Together, you are unstoppable. The money in this vault is considerable, more than William and I ever expected to accumulate. It is transferred into accounts bearing only your name, not Augustus, not joint ownership, yours alone. This is not because I do not trust your husband. It is because I understand what happens to women when they have no independent resources. They become vulnerable in ways that men never comprehend. If anything happens to Augustus, you need to be able to survive without permission or assistance from anyone else. This is insurance. Use it wisely. There is one more thing I left for you. In the cellar of the Quonset, behind the canning supplies, you will find a small cedar box. Inside is my mother's ring. She wore it for 60 years of marriage to a man who was not always easy to love. She asked that it be passed to someone who understood what marriage truly costs, and what it can become when both people refuse to quit. That someone is you. Wear it. Remember that you are not just a wife. You are not just a mother. You are Cordelia. You are a warrior. You are enough all by yourself, even though you are better with Augustus beside you. Live well. Love fiercely. Do not let anyone make you small. With all my faith, Ruth. The letter shook in my hands. Gus read over my shoulder, his breathing audible in the small room. The accounts are in your name. She wanted me to be independent. She was right to want that. The simplicity of his acceptance undid something in my chest. 62 years of marriage, and we were still discovering new territory, still learning what partnership could mean when stripped of all the assumptions we had carried like invisible luggage. Harriet returned after 20 minutes, knocking softly before entering.
Have you had a chance to review everything? We have. Can you tell us the current value? She consulted a tablet she carried, fingers moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. The stock certificates will need individual verification, but preliminary assessment suggests approximately $400,000. The bonds, adjusted for maturity and inflation, are worth roughly $75,000.
The certificate of deposit, with 40 years of compound interest at an average rate of 4%, has grown to approximately $145,000. She looked up from the screen, her professional mask cracking slightly to show genuine emotion. Mrs. Hartwell, you are looking at roughly $620,000 in total assets. There will be taxes, of course, but after everything is settled, you should net at minimum $500,000. The number hung in the air like smoke, visible but not quite solid. $500,000. More money than Gus and I had earned in our entire working lives combined. More than the farm had been worth. More than anything Robert had stolen. We had not been saved. We had been given the resources to save ourselves. The drive back to Mill Creek Road felt different than the drive out. We carried hope now, tangible and documented. But we also carried responsibility. Ruth's letter had been clear about expectations. This money was not for hoarding. It was for living, for building, for helping. Gus drove while I made lists in a notebook Harriet had given us. Priorities, projects, possibilities. The Quonset needed work to become truly livable. Insulation, better heating, a real bathroom instead of the makeshift facilities we had cobbled together. But beyond immediate needs, I began to see something larger. Gus, I know what we are going to build. He glanced over, waiting. Not just a home for us, a sanctuary, a place where people who have lost everything can come and find shelter while they rebuild. The words felt right as they left my mouth. Ruth's instructions had been explicit. Help others. And I had been helped.
by Pastor Williams with his van, by Edmund and Beatrice with their kindness, by strangers at the auction who clapped when everyone else sneered. Paying forward was not charity. It was survival strategy for the species.
How would that work? I sketched the vision as it formed. Phase 1. Make the Quonset livable for 2 people. 3 months of work. Phase 2. Expand. Partition the space to accommodate 2 or 3 families. Shared kitchen, common areas, private sleeping spaces. 6 months. Phase 3. Build community. Invite elderly people who needed housing. Teach skills, gardening, canning, basic repairs. Create a support network that outlasted individual need. Gus listened without interrupting, and I watched his expression shift from uncertainty to cautious enthusiasm.
That is ambitious, Cora. So is starting over at 79. We are already doing impossible things. We might as well do them in ways that matter. He reached across and squeezed my hand. 62 years, and you still surprise me. Good. A woman should remain mysterious. We both laughed, and the sound felt like medicine. Robert arrived on a Thursday in June.
The Quonset had been transformed in the 3 months since we had first opened its doors. Real plumbing connected to the well Duke had found. Solar panels on the roof feeding batteries that powered lights and a small refrigerator. Garden beds dug and planted with vegetables whose seedlings Beatrice had helped me start. Gus had the tractor running, its engine purring with mechanical satisfaction. I was on my knees in the garden, hands deep in earth, when Duke's bark alerted me. Not his friendly greeting bark, his warning bark. The sound of a dog who had identified a threat. The sedan was black and expensive, out of place on the dirt road that led to our property. Robert emerged in a suit that probably cost more than our monthly food budget, his shoes immediately collecting dust that made him look foolish rather than impressive. I stood slowly, joints protesting, and brushed dirt from my hands onto my work pants. Did not hurry. Did not rush to greet him as a mother is supposed to rush toward her child. Just stood and waited while he approached. Mother. The word carried no affection, just acknowledgement of biological connection and social obligation. Robert. Gus emerged from the workshop, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He came to stand beside me, but did not speak. This was my confrontation to lead. Robert's eyes swept the property, cataloging the improvements with the same appraising attention he had used at the farmhouse before destroying us. I heard you have been making progress here. That is good, really. The false warmth in his voice made my teeth ache. Say what you came to say, Robert. His expression shifted, the pleasant mask dropping to reveal calculation underneath. I heard about the investments, about the money grandfather and grandmother left. That money belongs to the family, to all of us. The presumption in his voice, the absolute certainty that our loss was his opportunity, ignited something in my chest that felt like fury, but burned cleaner and hotter. No. The single syllable landed between us with the weight of a gravestone. Robert's eyebrows rose, surprise breaking through his rehearsed confidence. Mother, be reasonable. That money came from grandfather's investments, from family assets. Patricia, Michael, and I have as much right. You have no rights here. My voice came out cold and level, each word precisely placed. That money belonged to your grandparents. They earned it. They invested it. They chose to leave it to your father and me, not to you. The law says exactly what I just told you. I have already consulted with an attorney. Everything your grandparents left is legally ours. You have no claim, no standing, no right to anything. Robert's face hardened, and for a moment I saw the calculation behind his eyes. He was weighing whether to push harder, whether to threaten legal action, whether to try manipulation or guilt,
or any of the other tools he had used so effectively 6 months ago. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us, and looked directly into his eyes, with every ounce of steel my Scottish ancestors had used to survive poverty and mines and winters that killed the weak.
You stole from us, Robert.
You took the farm your grandfather built and your father maintained. You took our security and our dignity. You left us to freeze in a church parking lot while you went home to your comfortable life and told yourself you had done nothing wrong. I tried to help. You helped yourself to everything we had. My voice rose, and I let it. Anger that I had suppressed for months because it felt unproductive now served as fuel.
You saw 2 elderly people with assets, and you took them because you were a thief dressed in expensive suits. Gus's hand touched my shoulder, grounding me, reminding me to breathe. I pulled back from the edge of rage into something colder and more effective. You can leave now, Robert, and do not come back until you are ready to apologize. Genuinely. For what you did to us. You are being unreasonable. I am being clear. There is a difference. He stood there, confusion and anger warring on his face. He had expected pleading, expected me to fold the way I had folded when he came with his investment proposals, expected the mother he thought he knew, rather than the woman I had become. Patricia will hear about this. Patricia can come speak to me herself if she has something to say. You can tell her I will give her exactly the same answer I am giving you.
Robert climbed back into his sedan and left, tires spinning in the dirt, childish display of temper that would have been funny if it was not so pathetic. When the car disappeared from sight, my knees went weak. Gus caught me, his arm around my waist, and I leaned into his solidity. I did not know you could be that fierce. Neither did I. Beatrice arrived 20 minutes later. I had called her as soon as Robert left, needing to talk to someone who would understand what I was feeling. She came with fresh bread and listening ears, and we sat at the small table in what was becoming our kitchen while I recounted the confrontation.
You did the right thing, Cordelia. I feel terrible. Of course you do. He is your son. But feeling terrible about setting boundaries does not mean the boundaries were wrong. She poured tea from a thermos she had brought, the steam carrying the scent of mint and comfort. You know what I see when I look at you? I shook my head.
I see a woman who has been trying to make herself small for 60 years. Trying to fit into the space other people think elderly women should occupy. And I see that woman finally standing up to full height. The image hit me with unexpected force. For decades I had practiced invisibility, mistaking it for virtue when it was simply surrender disguised as grace. Ruth saw it too. That is why she left everything to you instead of making it joint. She knew you needed permission to be big. I should not need permission. No, but most of us do anyway. The trick is learning to give it to ourselves. That evening, Duke led me down to the cellar again. He had been restless all afternoon, pacing and whining, clearly wanting to show me something. I followed him down the concrete steps with a lantern, my shadow enormous on the walls. He went directly to the corner where canning supplies were stacked. Jars and lids, and the old pressure canner that Ruth had left with detailed instructions for use. Behind the supplies, tucked against the wall where you would only find it if you were specifically searching, sat a small box made of cedar. My hands trembled as I lifted it. The wood was smooth from years of handling, the grain beautiful even in lantern light. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, lay a ring. Simple gold band with a small diamond, the setting old-fashioned but elegant. And beneath the ring, folded paper. Cordelia, this ring belonged to my mother. She wore it every day of her married life, 60 years, to a man who loved her, but did not always know how to show it. She asked that it be passed to someone who understood what marriage truly means. Not the ceremony,
not the paperwork, but the daily choice to stay when staying is hard.
I did not give it to Augustus because it was never meant for Augustus. It was meant for you. You have survived betrayal, poverty, loss. You have rebuilt your life from $900 and hope. You have proven yourself worthy of this ring in ways my mother would recognize and honor. Wear it. Remember that you are not just a wife or a mother or someone's grandmother. You are Cordelia. You are a warrior. You earned this through blood and tears and the refusal to accept defeat. I am proud of you. Ruth. The tears came then, hot and cleansing. I sat on the cold cellar floor with Duke pressing against my side and Ruth's letter in my hands, and I wept for everything I had lost and everything I had found, and the grandmother-in-law who had seen me clearly enough to prepare for the exact moment I would need to see myself. Gus found me there 20 minutes later. He did not ask what was wrong, just sat down beside me on the concrete, his old joints cracking in protest, and put his arm around my shoulders. I showed him the ring and the letter. He read slowly, lips moving slightly the way they did when he concentrated. When he finished, he set the letter aside and took the ring from the box. Then he did something I did not expect. He knelt in front of me, one knee on the cold floor, and held my left hand. Cordelia Hartwell, you are the strongest person I have ever known. You saved me. You saved us. You deserve this ring and every good thing this world can possibly offer. He slid Ruth's ring onto my finger, beside the simple wedding band he had given me 62 years ago in a ceremony we could barely afford. The two rings sat together, generations of marriage and commitment, and the fierce determination to keep loving, even when love became complicated. I am still me, Gus. I am still your wife. I know. But you are also so much more than I ever let you be. And I am sorry it took catastrophe for me to see it. We sat together on the cellar floor until the lamp burned low, and Duke's patient whining reminded us that the living needed dinner. The ring felt heavy on my finger, an anchor and a crown all at once. Summer transformed Mill Creek Road into something that resembled the farm we had lost, but better, leaner, more intentional. The garden produced more vegetables than two people could eat, so we shared with Beatrice and Edmund and the other people who had helped us when help was needed. Gus got the tractor running well enough to bush hog the overgrown acres, revealing good soil underneath years of neglect. We had become known in Cedar Falls, not as the elderly couple who lost everything, but as the people who refused to stay defeated. Edmund mentioned us in conversations. Beatrice brought friends by to see the garden. Pastor Williams visited and left saying we were proof that God's plans made no sense until you looked back on them from the other side. 5 elderly couples asked if they could learn from us. Not move in, not yet, but visit and understand how we had survived when survival seemed impossible. I started teaching basic skills in the Quonset's newly expanded workshop space: gardening, canning, financial planning for people on fixed incomes, emergency preparedness. Beatrice came to every session, helping me teach and learning what I knew that she did not. Cordelia, you are a teacher now. I am just sharing what Ruth shared with me. That is what teaching is, passing forward what was passed to you. The comparison made me uncomfortable and proud in equal measure. I had never thought of myself as someone with knowledge worth teaching, but the evidence suggested otherwise. People came, listened, took notes, updated what they learned. Michael's letter arrived in October, 8 months after the eviction. The envelope was plain, the return address a city I knew he had moved to for work. I opened it with Gus watching, uncertain what to expect. Mother, I do not expect you to read this. I would not blame you if you burned it without looking. But I needed to write, even if you never see these words. I am sorry. Not the kind of sorry that expects forgiveness or asks for anything in return. Just sorry for not being there, for not standing up to Robert when I should have, for being a coward. I was always the one who avoided conflict, you know that. When Robert started talking about investments and optimizing assets, I knew something was wrong. I felt it. But saying something would have meant fighting, and I have spent my entire life avoiding fights. That is not an excuse, just truth. I heard about what you have built at Mill Creek. Edmund Aldrich's daughter works with my wife, and she talks about the transformation. How you took what everyone called worthless and made it valuable. How you are teaching people to survive. I am proud of you, Mother. I know I have no right to be, but I am. I am not asking to visit, not asking for money or forgiveness or a place in your life. Just wanted you to know that not all your children forgot what you taught us. Some of us were just too weak to live up to it. I love you and Father. I always have, even when I was too weak to show it. Michael. I read the letter 3 times before handing it to Gus. We sat on the porch he had built, watching autumn light turn the Quonset's roof to bronze. Do you believe him? I thought about the question carefully. Michael had always been different from Robert and Patricia. Softer, more easily wounded, the kind of person who meant well but lacked the spine to act on good intentions when action cost something. I believe he is sincere. Whether that matters is a different question. What do you want to do? The answer came more easily than I expected. I want to write back. Tell him that we are not ready for reconciliation, but we are not closing the door forever. That if he truly wants to be part of our lives again, he will need to earn it through actions rather than words. That is fair. Fair is all I can manage. Forgiveness might come later, or it might not. But I will not pretend everything is fine when it is not. I wrote the letter that evening, choosing words carefully. Not cruel, but not soft. Honest about the hurt, and clear about expectations. Michael could take it or leave it. Either way, I had drawn a boundary that felt sustainable rather than bitter. The seasons turned. Winter came and went, testing the Quonset's improved heating and insulation. We stayed warm, stayed fed, stayed alive in ways that went beyond simple biology. Spring returned to find us stronger than we had been the year before. The garden expanded. The workshop filled with people learning skills their grandparents had known, but they had never needed until the economy made survival harder than their parents' generation had promised. I stood on the porch one April morning, coffee in hand, watching Duke investigate something in the underbrush. Gus came out to join me, his own cup steaming in the cool air. You know what today is? I thought for a moment. 1 year since we bought this place. 1 year since you decided we were not finished. The distinction mattered. Buying property was one thing. Deciding to live, rather than merely survive, was something else entirely. We were not finished, Gus. We were just getting started. He put his arm around my waist, and I leaned into his warmth. 80 years old and still discovering what my body could do when necessity required transformation. Ruth would be proud. Ruth is probably laughing at how long it took me to figure out what she knew all along. What was that? I looked at the Quonset, at the garden, at the life we had built from ruins and refusal. That the only person who could save me was me. Everyone else just provided tools and permission. The ring on my finger caught morning light, throwing tiny rainbows across the porch boards. 2 rings, 2 generations of women who had understood that marriage was partnership, and partnership meant both people standing at full height.
The last year had taught me that accommodation was not the same as peace, and that keeping quiet to preserve harmony often meant surrendering the self. Duke barked once, sharp and pleased. He had found something, a rabbit or an interesting smell or simply the joy of existing in a body that moved and worked and felt the sun.
I envied him that simplicity, even as I knew my own complexity was what made survival possible. We were not the people we had been when Robert destroyed us. We had been broken down to component parts and rebuilt into something both familiar and entirely new, stronger in the broken places, wiser in ways that only catastrophe teaches. And we were just beginning. Michael's response arrived 6 weeks later. He had begun volunteering at a food bank 3 mornings per week, learning, he wrote, what it meant to give without expecting anything in return. The signature read simply, "Your son, Michael." I wrote back with clear terms. 1 full year of volunteer work, without missing a session, then he could visit. No promises beyond conversation. Cautious hope, I told Beatrice over afternoon tea. The most dangerous feeling there is. Or the most necessary, she replied. December 2024 arrived with warnings that felt biblical. Our first winter at Mill Creek Road.
The Weather Service predicted historic cold, dangerous conditions.
I found Ruth's emergency protocols in her journal, written during a brutal 1983 cold snap that killed 17 Iowans. The instructions were precise. Seal gaps, fill containers with water, stockpile food inside, keep the stove burning. And most important, if neighbors need shelter, let them in. The Quonset can house 8 to 10 people. Do not let pride prevent you from saving lives. The storm hit Thursday evening with immediate fury. Wind made the Quonset's metal walls sing. Temperature plunged to -20, then -30 with wind chill. Inside, we held steady at 62 degrees. The knock came at 11 p.m. Beatrice, Edmund, and the elderly Thompsons stood in the snow, their furnaces dead, houses freezing. Mrs. Thompson's lips were blue, her breathing shallow. "Come in, quickly!" We wrapped her in blankets near the heater. Color returned to her face. Mr. Thompson's hands shook as he accepted tea. "I thought we were going to die." "You are safe now." 6 people sheltered in the Quonset, while outside the storm raged for 36 hours. Inside, we stayed warm, played chess, pieced quilts, survived. When the storm broke, Edmund brought news. 3 elderly residents found frozen in their homes, 2 more critical. But everyone who reached emergency shelters survived, including 6 people in a Rusted Quonset hut on Mill Creek Road. Word spread. People came not to gawk, but to understand. How had we survived when others froze? I showed them Ruth's preparations, the insulation, multiple heat sources, stockpiled supplies, planning that assumed worst-case scenarios. Carl Henderson, who had mocked me at the auction, came Monday morning, shame visible in his inability to meet my eyes. "Mrs. Hartwell, I was wrong. About everything. Would you teach us? About preparedness? About survival?" Classes began the following week. 8 people, then 15. I taught what Ruth had taught me. Beatrice contributed her knowledge. Gus demonstrated repairs. We became teachers simply by sharing what we knew. Edmund published an editorial about how preparation and community saved lives. The article generated respect, currency that mattered more than money. In January, sorting through cellar boxes, I found Ruth's final folder. For Cordelia, when ready. 3 letters inside, dated 1975, 1990,
and 1992.
The first, from 1975, described her fears about Robert's cold calculation, Patricia's lack of empathy, Michael's weakness.
Augustus will need someone beside him, she wrote. Someone who refuses to break. If you are reading this, you are that person. The 1990 letter observed my hidden strengths. She hides herself, diminishes her capabilities, but she is stronger than she knows. She can lead. Mill Creek will force that discovery when she has lost everything else.
The final letter, written weeks before her death in 1992, said,
I love her like the daughter I never had. I believe in her more than she believes in herself. Go well, Cordelia. Be fierce. Claim your full height and never apologize for taking up space.
I wept on the cellar floor, Duke pressed against my side.
Ruth had seen me, had believed in me, had prepared not just resources, but permission to become someone larger than the roles I had accepted.
Michael arrived in May after his year of volunteering. Thinner, grayer, wearing work clothes instead of expensive suits.
I was a coward, he said simply. I let Robert destroy you because stopping him would have cost me something. I am trying to become someone who would not have let it happen. We established boundaries. Monthly visits, no promises, just the slow work of rebuilding trust through actions rather than words. Summer transformed Mill Creek Road. Classes expanded. The Quonset became community center. Michael visited monthly, each time slightly easier. Robert never contacted us. Patricia sent threatening letters we ignored. October arrived with colors that stopped my breath. 80 years old and still capable of wonder, I sat on the porch and wrote a letter to women who would come after me. My name is Cordelia Hartwell. I was 79 when I lost everything. 80 when I discovered I had never been lost, only misdirected by assumptions about who elderly women were allowed to be. You are stronger than you know. Do not wait for permission to lead. Do not waste years making yourself small. I rebuilt my life at 79 with $900 and a rusted Quonset hut. You can rebuild yours at any age with whatever you have. Be fierce, be large, be unapologetic, and know that I believed in you before we ever met, the way Ruth believed in me. I placed the letter in a metal box with my journals and Ruth's, then carried it to the cellar, where the next woman would find it, where the chain of belief would extend into futures I would never witness. Duke followed me up the stairs, 12 years old and loyal still. We emerged into autumn afternoon. Gus finished loading vegetables for distribution. All done? He asked. The foundation is laid. We sat on the porch as sunset painted the Quonset's roof amber and rose. The rust everyone had mocked now looked beautiful in the light. 63 years, Gus said, and I'm still discovering who you are. Is that good or bad? Extraordinary. I had lost a farm and gained myself, had been betrayed and discovered community, had started over at 79 and found not diminishment, but expansion. The ring Ruth left me caught the light. 2 rings. 2 generations understanding that partnership meant both people standing at full height. Night was coming. Tomorrow would bring work and classes and the continuation of lives that refused to stay broken. I was Cordelia Hartwell, 80 years old, stronger than I had ever been, and just getting started.